Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Johns Hopkins School of Education Doctor of Philosophy in Education Virtual Information Session. My name is Sion John. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at the Johns Hopkins School of Education. And also here with me, I have my colleague from the Office of Admissions, and she will introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Serena Stewart, and I'm an Assistant Director here in the School of Education's Admissions Office. Welcome.
Thank you, Serena. Also presenting today, we have two student speakers, Avery Davis and Jody Miller. And lastly, we have the program lead of the PhD program, Dr. Hunter Gelbeck. And before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. First, today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link to the recorded video within 10 business days. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please type your question in the Q&A box and we'll read and answer your questions. Next, I would like to share the agenda for today's presentation. We'll kick off the presentation sharing an overview of the Johns Hopkins School of Education. I'll introduce Dr. Gelbeck. Then Dr. Gelbeck will go over details of the PhD program. We have two PhD students here with us today, and they'll talk about their student experience at SOE. Lastly, we'll cover admissions requirements and leave the floor open for questions at the end. And to start, we're one of 9 schools at the Johns Hopkins University. We began offering college courses for teachers in 1909 and then became our own school in 2007. And we're proud to share that the Johns Hopkins School of Education is consistently ranked one of the top schools in education by the U.S. News and World Report. And for school enrollment, we have approximately 1,741 students, and we offer 25 graduate programs, and that includes our doctoral, master's, and graduate certificate programs. And we have a strong network of over 24,000 SOE alums. Moving on to faculty introductions. Dr. Hunter Gelbeck is the program lead for the PhD program. He joined SOE in 2019. He received his PhD at Stanford University. Dr. Gelbeck's research focuses on improving the social and motivational context of schools, and he was recently named an American Psychological Association Fellow for their Educational Psychology Division. So at this time, I would like to hand the floor over to Dr. Gelbeck, and Dr. Gelbeck will go over the details of the PhD program. Welcome, Dr. Gelbeck.
Hey, thanks so much. Thank you guys for coming. I know we all lead very busy lives, so really appreciate your taking the time out to invest and learn a bit about the PhD program here at Hopkins. I think probably the easiest way to start out as we kind of flip over to the next slide is to just kind of cover a big basic differentiator, which is we do have a PhD program and an EDD program. And so 2 doctorates, what's the difference? So although there are some sort of credit differences that you see there up at the top, I would say the big difference is really in orientation. And so that box that you see on emphasis, most of our EDD students are working full-time. They're in an applied practice kind of setting, and they're really thinking about sort of research and dissertation work as applied to the setting that they're interested in. By contrast, the PhD students, it's full-time. You're coming to campus, so it's not remote. And so this in-person program is really about people who are interested in pursuing educational research. They've got a particular interest in mind and are really particularly interested in sort of producing generalizable knowledge. I'll say a bit more about this in a sec, but it is an interdisciplinary program. And so you get folks, most everyone has at least a little bit of an interest in sort of educational policy or how they would apply their research to practice settings or policy settings. Some people are more focused on sort of sociology, social context kinds of things. Other people a little bit more educational psychology and science of learning. But the goal is both to make sort of contributions that are theoretically important, that would generalize to lots and lots of settings, as well as to think about, solving real issues in the field. So then, what happens after you get a doctorate at Hopkins? Well, if you're in an in the EDD program, oftentimes people stay in their same role, at least for a year or two. They've been working full time. The program's a big lift. And so, they might not want to go do a job search immediately. So you see things like people doing K-12 administration, higher ed. Some people will go off toward more of a think tank research kind of role, but often they're trying to influence policy and practice in a kind of more of an educational research consumer kind of a role, like translating research for people. Whereas the PhD graduates, we see people headed off into the academy, whether it's a postdoc or being a professor, academic research kinds of positions, educational consultant kinds of positions, also pretty common. So from here forward, then we'll focus on the PhD program, but that's just sort of a distinction at the high level between the EDD doctorate and the PhD doctorate. So with that in mind, and focusing on the next slide, then on the PhD program. All right, great. So we're doing these sort of, kind of faculty roles, educational research sorts of roles, but in a lot of senses, that's really just sort of the instrumental goal of the program. What's the spirit of the program? What do we do in the program to train you to kind of help you win these positions? Well, a lot of what we're trying to do is sort of leverage educational research to try and improve policy and practice, but with a particular orientation toward underserved students in schools. So I think that's a pretty big theme, and kind of, one of the things I'll try and highlight throughout our discussion today is what makes Hopkins distinctive. And so I think that orientation is particularly distinctive. As you're looking around at other programs, I think you'll see some that are super practice oriented, some that are super research for research sake oriented. We're kind of both. We're greedy. We want both. We want you to be influential in both the sort of research circles and in the practice circles. But again, sort of with this orientation toward, like, there's really not an equal playing field in this country. And so what can we do particularly for the underserved students, those schools, those teachers? I mentioned previously the interdisciplinary training, and I think the other characteristic that I'd really layer on there, and Avery and Jody might speak to this a little bit later, but we do have a pretty strong orientation toward really rigorous research methods. So again, as you're sort of thinking through different aspects of different programs, I think that's one of the big things that you would get here at Hopkins. So on the next slide, the sort of research orientation and this emphasis on methods, couple other things to unpack that a little bit. One is that we do have this sort of interdisciplinary orientation. And I think, to be kind of candid, it leans toward two core disciplines, more sort of learning sciences and educational psychology on the one hand, sociology of education, thinking about social context on the other hand, but either or both of those leading toward sort of some influence on educational policy and practice. So as we're thinking about these sort of rigorous research methods in particular, there's a whole branch of educational psychology that's really interested in measuring stuff. Both sociologists and ed psych kind of folks very interested in rigorous statistical methods, some of which are very much tailored toward schools, right? Schools are nested within states, within schools, you got classrooms nested within those. So there are particular statistical approaches that can help with that. Not all of our students are statistically oriented, but it is an emphasis of the program. And so even if you want to pursue more sort of qualitative approaches, you'll get a pretty strong background in methods generally, but then in statistics as well, which is great for going on the job market. You can talk to lots of different kinds of researchers that way. So as you're sort of digesting and thinking through like what's the right program, what's the right fit, is in this orientation, sort of interdisciplinary orientation sounds like the right fit. You also need to think about your particular interests. And I think the best way to gauge sort of how you might kind of fit in at Hopkins is to think about speaking with some of the faculty members who have interests that align with yours. And if you can do that prior to your application, it can be super helpful. Part of the reason for this is you're going to spend a lot of time working primarily with sort of one or a couple key advisors. And so this kind of apprenticeship model is another kind of key characteristic of the program. And so with that in mind, might as well kind of do your due diligence and meet the person or people that you're likely to be working with a fair bit. From here, let's talk a little bit about some of the sort of main features and kind of structures and logistics of the program. So you are fully funded for 4 years coming to Hopkins. Most students then complete the program within either 4 or 5 years. Increasingly, especially for the students who are interested in academic jobs, they're often taking one of those years and working on a professor's project. I'll say more in a bit, but sometimes winning fellowships that can allow them to get a 5th year of funding so that they're kind of covered and can take a little more time, get a few more publications out, and just kind of bolster their record a little bit more before they go on the job market. So 4 years of funding, that covers all your tuition gets paid for, you get a stipend. This past year it was $30,000. I am unaware of any changes, so I sort of assume that's the direction it will head in next year. You also get full health, vision, dental insurance. And the one other requirement that I think is useful to mention is that students do end up doing 2 teaching assistantships. And this is, I really think, an integral part of the training. So even if you're not interested in going on and becoming a professor and actually teaching, you're always going to be in this position of having to explain to people, like, here's the research, here's what it means, here's why it's important, here's the cautions you should have interpreting these results. And so the teaching assistantship is super helpful in sort of training up that muscle, if you will, especially for people who haven't been K-12 teachers. And it's pretty flexible, so students fulfill those teaching assistantships across a variety of courses, doing a variety of different tasks. And because it's a pretty small program, we're usually able to tailor pretty well and figure out good fits for sort of, given your background, given what you want to do moving forward, what would be a good assistantship that would really kind of bolster your training and skill set. So other just kind of numbers and logistical things, the program is 72 credit hours. That's maybe a little deceiving because almost every single student, given what you see below, that a master's degree is required, almost all students petition and get this 12 credits. So for most students, it's really functionally, it's more like a 60 credit requirement. But one way or the other, credits are, I would say, and again, you guys can ask Avery and Jody, that's not the big deal. That's not what students tend to worry about. You've got a number of requirements, and we'll actually see those. Actually, let's go ahead and flip to the next slide and talk through those. But these requirements, tick off those courses pretty seamlessly anyway. I mentioned a research methods focus, and indeed there it is, 18 credit hours. So that's a lot of what you're spending your time on. The core seminars are where we kind of introduce you to these different disciplinary approaches. So thinking about educational problems from sort of an educational psychology lens, from a more of a sociology kind of lens, thinking about educational policy implications. And then from there, in those, both those sort of research methods courses and the core seminars tend to be front loaded on students' first 2 years of the program. And then the last 2 or 3 years, that's when students are taking a little bit more on the sort of electives. This is really pertinent to my particular substantive area that I want to study. And then some dissertation research credits where it's typically sort of working pretty closely with, again, some people have one advisor, some people get a little bit more of a team of advisors. So that's typically how the kind of coursework piece breaks out. And then on the next slide, what we'll see is the milestones. And this is where students are really developing their own research more. So before you hit year 3, and for almost all students, this is sort of late spring, early summer at the end of their year 2, they'll do comprehensive exams. And that's just sort of coverage of like, hey, all that coursework, all the core seminars, we really did do a good job of teaching you how to think interdisciplinarily, and kind of covering that content. And then once students finish that, then they really start thinking much more about the dissertation. So there's a proposal defense that gets completed typically during year 3. And then depending on people's pathway and trajectory, the final dissertation defense, sort of both oral and written parts on both the proposal and the final dissertation. That'll happen typically in year 4 or 5 for the final defense. All right, so let's breathe a little color into, like, that's lots of kind of nitty-gritty information. So yeah, what does that look like for actual students? And so one way to get a little gauge on that before we talk to actual students is a little sense of what people are studying when they're here. So one recent dissertation that shall of course remain anonymous, at least until Jody starts talking, is about stress. How do we measure it? Associations with other important educational outcomes. What can schools do to support students? I don't need to read all these off to you, but I think what you'll see, the sort of theme that I'll sort of underscore that I think pops up in all of these is what I said before about, like, wow, there's really something in it for researchers, right? These are all topics that are pushing these little subfields within education forward by answering important questions. The information that comes out of it should be generalizable, but it's also practical, right? There's, without connecting too many dots, I think you can see how all these topics would be important from either a policymaker's perspective or a practitioner's perspective. I think you'll also see in here some of the range of sort of methodological flexibility. We've got some big data set stuff here. I think there's some experiments. At least one experiment in there. And so, again, kind of a nice showcase of what you see with the training that goes into a lot of our students. New slide on the next one that I just added this year, because I think especially recently our students have been doing a really good job kind of nationally in terms of getting some pretty big awards. So not surprisingly from the name, National Academy of Education and Spencer co-sponsor a really impressive, very, very competitive dissertation fellowship. And none other than our own Avery Davis has won one of those for this year. So you'll hear a little bit more from him later. Similarly, very prestigious ARA Minority Dissertation Fellow Award. We had one of our students win that, I think 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, I think. And then just this past year, had an inductee for the Edward Boucher Graduate Honor Society. again, incredibly competitive university-wide award that only, one or two people from each division. So you're competing with medicine, with public health, and yeah, we're having students win those awards too. So you're going to have an amazing peer group. That was sort of a long-winded way of saying your peer group is going to be stellar here at Johns Hopkins. And then as sort of a similar, in a similar vein, and on the next slide, you'll see that our graduates are tending to be really, really successful. So a few recent examples, and you can see people sort of going into academia, postdocs, government types of positions also. I think I didn't mention that before. Some nonprofits, a lot of research scientists kinds of positions. Those can be in industry sometimes, in academia at other times, like research centers. And so as a couple sort of 4 examples, Rebecca just recently got a position, I guess 2 years ago now, at Vanderbilt. She's back to the interdisciplinary theme. She's in the anthropology department there. So, really impressive to get an assistant professorship there. Suyun just got a year ago, I think, a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Virginia. So again, another great placement, should set her up very well for an academic position, which I think is what she's after, but don't quote me on that. And then Amanda, who you see on the right, was like so good we couldn't let go of her and kept her here at Hopkins. So she's working in one of the centers at the School of Education. Other even more recent, some of our graduates from this past year, we've got one who's in a visiting assistant professorship at Indiana, another who's working at AIR, American Institute for Research. So a pretty broad range, but all with the common theme of really putting educational research into the service of trying to improve policy, improve practice. As people go off into careers, there's maybe a little more spread away from that core theme of being tightly focused on underserved students in schools. But 9 times out of 10, that's, kind of where people's hearts are and the work that they keep doing. So that's on the back end. What about currently, like while they're in the program in Hopkins? And honestly, like we see students not having to wait around to impact education. So on the next slide, you'll see a little bit of what students are doing, I think maybe with one exception, while they're in the program. So this is Amanda, who is the sort of last person I talked about on the previous screen. So she is like making the news, right? So the article you see in the bottom left was this amazing study. I think it was part of her dissertation where they provided a bunch of students in Baltimore City Public Schools with glasses on the crazy premise that if you couldn't see the board, you probably weren't learning as much. And so this true experiment got published in a pretty prestigious, actually, medical journal. But then, this is prominent enough stuff that the Ed Week, a pretty prominent education kind of newspaper, is covering it. So I think Sarah Sparks interviewed Amanda for that piece, if I'm not mistaken. Moving on, though, it's not just that Ed Week is covering our stuff, it is that we are writing for Ed Week. So Sarah is now a 3rd year, I think. And so this was the product of a class assignment that she then kind of kept going, kept working on, editing. And so it's a class assignment she did last fall and ended up getting it published in Ed Week, which I think is pretty cool. Onward here, we see, not surprisingly on the next little click, we'll see a journal article. And this is mostly just to illustrate that there is a ton of collaboration that goes on between faculty and students. So part of this apprenticeship model means that, slowly, bit by bit, students are becoming the peers of all the faculty here. And so the fact that Natalie gets, a recent graduate, gets to be first author, and Leni, the faculty member, is second author, I think is really telling of this sort of progression that happens over the course of students' time here. All right, next one. This is going to make one of us very happy. Jody Miller, amazing. So this is Jody's research, and she'll probably say a little bit more about this. So I will try my best not to steal her thunder. But she has an amazing app going that is so popular. And this is the old one, Jody. Jody just got interviewed again by a local TV station about the very same app that she's still working on. And I'll let her say more about that. But we're getting a lot of coverage and a lot of good press in the local news, and more than once. And then I think I've got one or two more to talk about. Yeah. So this one I really like. So this is a policy report, basically. So it's not just that we have students sort of being the news, writing for the news, writing journal articles in tandem with their faculty advisors, getting coverage on TV stations. But, we're really trying to sort of do our bit to shape policy. And so the other reason I like this example is Paula and Logan are different years in the program, but because it is a small program and we do, I think, a really good job of having students, we say a lot that the PhD at Johns Hopkins is a team sport and everyone's on the same team. And so you really end up meeting lots of people from, much older, more senior cohorts, and they provide you with advice and wisdom when you're, a first year and a second year. And then the same is expected of you to kind of pay it forward to the next generation when you're a fourth year or fifth year. So I want to make sure we leave a good chunk of time for our student speakers. So I'm just going to say one more set of things on one more slide, and then to the best of my abilities, I'll try and be quiet. So top 5 fit indicators. So to me, at the end of the day, the thing that is most important as you're sort of thinking through options and opportunities of PhD programs is this a fit? Is this the right program for me? And simply because you're looking for XYZ and a program offers ABC doesn't mean you're a bad candidate, doesn't mean that's a bad program. It's just not a fit. And so I thought it would be useful for me to sort of wrap up my part by talking through what I think are kind of the most important signals that, like, yes, Hopkins might be a really good fit for you. So thing number one is that you're looking for this apprenticeship experience. So a lot of your education comes from this tight working relationship with, and again, for some people it's one advisor, for others it's a couple advisors. So that's key. If that's appealing to you, Hopkins is a great place. If you really want more of a cohort experience, most of your learning comes from coursework and you're, occasionally meeting with professors, but that's not where the bulk of your learning happens. Then it might not be as strong a fit. Second thing I'll mention is the interdisciplinary approach. And again, it's, as you saw from Rebecca's example, right? Anthropology, not one of the disciplines I mentioned, but that was her focus sort of coming into the program and throughout the program. So we do pull from other disciplines, but I think if you sort of had to say what are the core disciplines that we're pulling from and drawing into education, it's sort of the educational psychology or learning sciences and the sociology with an orientation toward sort of policy and practice applications and outcomes. The methods training, I think, is another big one. It has historically been a little bit more quantitative in orientation. I think my sense is that's shifting a little bit, and that we will do more and more in the coming years to strengthen the qualitative components of that. But one way or the other, it's pretty serious methods training. So if that's appealing, great. And if that's not your thing, also fine, but maybe less of a fit for you. All right, this is a big one. I need to unpack this a little bit. You want to learn research approaches of the future. So hopefully we would all agree that a good, thorough researcher should analyze their data thoroughly and exhaustively. But I think we also would all agree, I hope, that a good researcher should not torture their data until it tells them what they want to hear. And so where do you draw the line between that? So medicine has sort of been there and done that. Psychology is sort of on the tail end. These other disciplines have had crises, sometimes known as the replication crisis is sort of what psychology called it. But finding out that a lot of researchers were sort of on the wrong side of that line, and there was a little bit more data torture going on than data thoroughness. And so when I say one of the things you'll get and one of the things that will make Hopkins a great fit for you is if you want to learn research approaches of the future, there's a wave that is just starting to happen in education about open science, trying to be transparent about all the analyses you've done, which ones you predicted, which ones you sort of checked out after the fact, ways to make your science more open and accessible to other people, sharing methods, sharing data sets, sharing analytic plans, sharing the code for your analysis. All those things help make the educational science that you're engaged in much more open, much more transparent. That is where the field is headed. I am absolutely convinced of it, but it's not catching on super fast. And so I think Hopkins is a great bit if you want to be on the very front edge of this wave and not have to learn this stuff 5 years into your career and realize the way you've been doing research for the past 5 years didn't work well. And now everyone's questioning it. So if you want to sort of get ahead on all this stuff, I think coming to Hopkins and learning these sort of principles and practices of open science is absolutely a great investment. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think we've covered this a fair bit before, is that you want to have the impact that you have in the world. You want that to be on educational practice, and especially by using kind of research as a bridge. The one thing I think I haven't said yet, which is key, is a lot of the way that this happens for at least a number of our students is through research practice partnerships. So there are a lot of opportunities to work closely. Sometimes it's with schools and school districts. Other times it's with other purveyors of education. So in my lab, we're working pretty closely with an organization that does environmental education, and it's not a school, it's not a school district, but they bring students onto their campus and give them an outdoor education experience for a week. So however your advisor or the center you get connected with is connecting their research or connecting with a practice organization, that can vary. But the theme that you will find lots of opportunities to be in conversation with and conducting research on and with practitioners, that's a pretty, I think, steady theme across a lot of the experiences you would find here. All right, so let me wrap up. You will see on the next slide a little bit of evidence that it can be done. We do graduate people. People have amazing and fun times while they're here. The happy hour one is from ARA, the big Education Research Association conference. And so with that, I'm excited to introduce, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but Avery Davis is a fourth-year student wrapping up this year, all sorts of amazing qualities and characteristics. And then following Avery, we'll have Jody Miller talk, who is actually an esteemed alum. So I should say Dr. Jody Miller, I apologize. And so Avery, can I let you take it away, give folks a little sense of your experience, and then we'll pivot into question and answer after Jody goes. Thanks.
Thank you, Hunter. Absolutely. So my name's Avery. I am in my 4th year in the program, and as Hunter mentioned briefly earlier, I'm on the Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, also co-sponsored with the National Academy of Education. And what my dissertation looks at is financial aid and higher education, looking at students' trajectories getting to and through college, particularly how they pay for that. I look at this through the initial application process, through their scholarship packaging, and also whether working in college is worth it. So do jobs take away or add to their academic achievement? And I initially chose this program because I wanted to have an experience with the quality faculty. And I felt that I could get a strong methodological training, as it's been reiterated multiple times today already, but I knew I wanted to do quantitative work before coming in. And so I was looking for programs that had that kind of sort of niche and training, not just in the basic introduction courses, but also having some topical courses at advanced levels as well, and faculty that were doing that kind of work as well. And so that was my initial attraction and my reason for coming to the program. And one of the things I didn't realize initially is that there's this very much cohort community that happens, and it's not just within your own cohort, but the levels above and then level below you, year below or year above, I should say. That you really get to bounce ideas off of each other, you get to commiserate with each other, you get to, talk about readings or, prepare presentations. And I think that's been a really valuable component. And, there's sort of a strong sense of camaraderie that happens with that. And what I would recommend to students who are considering sort of any PhD program, but at Hopkins specifically, look at what faculty are there and what are they currently researching on. So some faculty might have sort of a name that they've done something in the past, but they're sort of on a different research trajectory now. And so looking at their recent publications, maybe working papers that they have out, and sort of maybe if they're in affiliated with a research center, what is those research centers' priorities, and if they align with you in that sense, to get a sort of just a better understanding on what they're doing and whether it relates to something you're interested in. And I found that particularly helpful because you can get a sense of, okay, even though this person might have information and knowledge to pass on and could ask good questions, they might not be particularly adequate for the primary advisor or learning apprenticeship model that that's a. So that's just a brief introduction to myself. I know we're going to move forward after this, but thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I know we'll have some time for questions at the end.
Hi, all. As Hunter mentioned, I'm Jody. I graduated in May, so it can be done. I did it in 5 years, sorry. My research topic is stress, and so the first dissertation was mine. What brought me to Hopkins, so I was a teacher before I came to Hopkins, and what I liked about the program was there's a lot of talk about policy and this kind of influence on thinking. What I found was there was a lot of thinking about, like, how do we put this into practice, and like, what do we do with this research that we're finding? And that was something that was really important to me. There's also this entrepreneurial spirit, which I didn't realize would end up becoming more real for me than it did with WellCheck. But I really like the idea that there's a lot of flexibility in that you have access to these 8 other parts of the university, and people encourage you to go out and meet people from public health and collaborate with people. At different times, I've worked with people in the econ department, public health, psych and brain sciences, and I really liked that because while we are a somewhat decentralized university, there's a lot of interdisciplinary research going on, not only just within the School of Education, but beyond the university at large, which I really liked. And as you see, one of the things I found really valuable was that there were so many different research interests and projects going on. I really love learning about what my friends are doing and hearing about how different their work is from mine, but how ultimately they are related on some level. And as you heard so many times, we do really have strong methods training. And that's really valuable because whatever you want to do next, you will have these skills, these statistical data analysis skills, whether it is pursuing a position in academia, or if you want to go to some kind of think tank or even government or district level, having these skills is so invaluable and makes you a stronger candidate in almost every realm. And I think as you're thinking about this process, I highly encourage you to think about person over place. So as Hunter mentioned, we have this really wonderful apprenticeship model. So I was lucky to have an incredible advisor. She and I are still really close and work together now, even though she is no longer at Hopkins and I graduated. And that's been such a wonderful part of my experience. And so you really want to find an advisor who you think you will connect with, who you've heard good things about from their other students. So talking to current students at Hopkins or other institutions is a great way to learn that information, because it's 5 years or 4 years and it's a long time and it's challenging. This business is wonderful, but it challenges you to think harder and write again and rewrite. And so I encourage you to kind of make sure that when you're looking at your places, you're finding a group of people, both from the other students, but also in your advisor who will be supportive.
Thank you, Dr. Galbeck, Avery, and Dr. Miller for the wonderful presentation. So now we're going to continue by going over the admission application requirements. First, applicants must submit an online application, which can be found on the school's website. And keep in mind, there is an $80 application fee when you submit your application. But currently right now, if you submit your application before November 1st, your application fee will be waived. You'll need an updated resume. Your personal statement should not exceed no more than 750 words. In addition to the personal statement, a writing sample must be submitted. And this would be a sample of your most professional writing that demonstrates your analytical and critical writing skills. And moving on, you should plan on submitting 3 letters of recommendation, and it is recommended that these letters should include the following: 2 submitted by a faculty member who are familiar with your previous academic work, and 1 by a supervisor or administrator who has been in a position to evaluate your professional development. We'll need official GRE scores and official transcripts. And keep in mind, we'll need all official transcripts, including institutions you may have taken courses but did not receive a degree. And lastly, an interview may be required. The application deadline date for the PhD program is December 15, 2023. All materials, including official transcripts, letters of recommendation, test scores, must be received by the admissions office on or before December 15, 2023 deadline for full consideration. And there are additional steps you need to take in order to complete the application process. If you're an international student, you must submit a TOEFL or IELTS score or a TOEFL waiver request form. And please note, if you hold qualifying degrees or have earned credits from institutions outside the US, you must have your academic records evaluated by an accredited independent credential evaluation agency before you can be considered for admission to the PhD program. And additional information can be found on the school's website. And please note, all PhD students at SOE are eligible for a fellowship for up to 4 years. The fellowship includes a yearly stipend and will cover tuition and fees. The fellowship will also cover individual health, dental, and vision insurance. And lastly, you must be registered full-time and be in a good academic standing every semester to continue to be eligible for the fellowship. Right. So thank you for attending the Doctor of Philosophy and Education virtual information session. At this time, we would like to open up the floor for questions. Please type your question in the Q&A box. Please note, we have also our 2 student speakers, and they're more than happy to answer any questions you have for Avery and Dr. Miller.
Maybe I'll take that first one from Alexandra. Thank you. Opportunities for concentration. So for example, STEM education. So yes and no. So there's nothing official like that's going to go on your transcript particularly, in the sense that you'll get like a little extra stamp of approval that you were like STEM focused. On the other hand, you know, we've one of our new hires for this year is Ebony McGee, who's very much focused on STEM and particularly sort of minority student STEM pathways into higher education. And so with her as your potential advisor, that's going to really signal to lots of people that that's a focus for you. So the quick answer is absolutely. It's a small program. It's very tailored. And so you'll get that ability to concentrate in exactly the thing you want to focus on, but in a sort of like, you know, marketing kind of way. Like there's nothing official that goes on your transcript. I think admissions is handling Alfonso's question. Yeah, Ginger, great question. Let me punt that one over to maybe Avery and Jody could each kind of give separate answers of what went into your choice and thinking about how you selected faculty advisors. And that could be like either coming into the program or during the program.
Yeah, for me, I initially was, you know, looking at schools of education and then looking at the faculty that were already there and then seeing if their current research projects were related to what I wanted to do. And sort of kind of proposed it in that way. And then during the interview process, began to build those connections and figuring out if it was a good fit. And so that's how I selected my initial advisor. And then during the program, I was introduced to other faculty members through coursework, through Hunter providing introductions, and was able to sort of build out the rest of my committee that way. And they've supported me as well. So getting a sense of familiarity with their research initially, and then being in the program, taking classes, meeting people through connections has been the way I've built out my advisor and my mentor group on the committee.
I had a slightly different path. So I came in kind of envisioning one path for myself and then transitioned after my first year. And so I ended up with an advisor who we have a lot of like themes in common, meaning like we both really care about well-being and stress and executive functioning, etc. And we probably both kind of identify as ed psych people, but my advisor is more focused on early childhood and teacher well-being, and I focus on more of like children and or K-12. But she was really supportive and open to working with me and finding ways that we could collaborate together. And she was just like a really wonderful person and an amazing mentor. And so it ended up working out really well for me. But I think Avery's points were really well taken. See what they're currently working on, and from there find out also who in the school might be doing things that are tangentially related that maybe can serve as a secondary advisor or just someone with whom you frequently chat and talk about ideas with.
Great, super helpful. Yeah, nothing to add. I think that's perfect. David, how many years of professional field experience does the ideal applicant have? Good question. I'm gonna kind of punt on this answer. I think it's really about quality, not quantity, right? So the headline question we're sort of asking ourselves as we like read through applications during admission season is sort of what's the promise and potential of this person as an educational researcher. And so if you can have, you know, 1 or 2 years of experience and demonstrate like unbelievable promise, and you're asking, sort of posing really interesting, exciting, pushing the field forward kinds of questions in your application, that's great. We're going to be excited about that. If you've been a 20-year career teacher and come up with something that's like sort of a topic, but you know, not really that interesting, and people have been kicking it around for a long time, and it's not really a research question, those 20 years of research experience are going to seem a little underwhelming to the admissions committee. So I'm not answering your question. You know, in general, I think people more experience tends to help people generate sort of more interesting questions and the capacity to generate or to position yourself as sort of having more potential as a researcher. But anyway, I'm going to go with the quality over quantity answer on that one. And Christy, applications from people coming from totally different backgrounds, such as tech. Yes, that happens. I think the key element there is, can you make a connection to why education is so interesting, so important, why it's your passion, why it is the thing you need to do next. And so obviously, if you've been a teacher, been a principal, done some policy work in education, it tends to be easier to sort of see your potential as an educational researcher. But yeah, I mean, in this year's cohort, we have one of our students has a strong business background and was thinking about education very much in more sort of like corporate leadership kinds of settings, and found a couple advisors in the school who are going to be good fits for her. And so from a background with like nothing really in K-12, nothing much in education policy, she got in despite it being a competitive cohort this past year. All right, I think admissions is helping on the GRE question, so thank you there. I will just note that we totally get that not everyone tests well. We very much take the sort of philosophical approach that all the little parts of an admissions application have their own pros and cons and flaws. And so the more information we have, the more we can make a good decision. So we're not going to overweight your GRE scores and pretend like they're the end all be all and that says everything about you. So we really do a comprehensive composite look that's taking into account not just your scores, but your grades, your recommendation letters, your essays, or actually, I'm going to tie that into David's question. The most important part of the application process, I think, is fit, right? It's like this combination of fit and potential. So what's your potential as and promise and prospects as an educational researcher? If that is high and there's a fit, the odds of you getting an offer of admission are excellent. And to the extent that you're excellent, but there's maybe not a totally clear fit, then your odds drop a little bit. Or if there's a clear fit, but your application seems a little mediocre on some fronts, that's going to reduce your odds as well. But I would think those things that you can signal fit and signal promise as an educational researcher, put those two together, and your application is going to be quite strong for us. Shared examples of public work, but did not mention the topic of environmental education. Yeah, I mean, so that's a little idiosyncratic to me. I am always excited about people who are interested in environmental education. I will be recruiting students for next year for my lab. And we do have, they're sort of starting to come out of the woodwork, other faculty who are interested in this topic, but it's not programmatically, it's not a focus, it's more a focus kind of just for my lab. All right, Amalia, we tend to take about 5 students each year, plus or minus, and that, law of small numbers, is always hard to get that exactly right, but that's a pretty good running average. Yeah, so it is, Leslie, thank you. It is a full-time program. So the expectation is that you're not working during the day and there are not evening classes. For working professionals, back to one of those early slides, the EDD program might be worth looking into. That might be a better match. So think through sort of which program might be the better fit there, I think would be my main response there. Haven't published before, not to worry. I think most of our applicants have not. So that is certainly not a requirement for applying to the program. That said, if you do have publications, for sure, that would make a great writing sample. All right, Daniela. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following the connection with the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. I don't know of any collaboration that we have with that institute. And if the spirit of the question, oh, sorry, follow up there. As an international student, can I apply for a fellowship? Yes, we have plenty of international students. And so the application process, with the exceptions of what Sion said a little bit earlier, the application process is the same. You just need the couple extra things for verifying your transcript. And Sion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have a master's from an English-speaking country, do you still need the TOEFL score or the IELTS score?
No, so if they've studied in the US full time for 2 years, the TOEFL can be waived, and the waiver form is located in the online application. You would just fill out that, you studied in the US full time for 2 years, and then also upload it could be like an official transcript, just showing that you studied in the US. But yes, to your question in regards to international transcripts, that would have to be evaluated.
Right. And I would just add that it doesn't have to be a US institution, even though those Canadians,
Yes, if it's like a
have
Canadian,
kind of funny accents, like they, from our perspective, that's good enough English, and we're still good with that.
Then no evaluation is needed.
All right, I think we're close to at time, and just a couple of quick questions left. Application decided by my faculty mentor or through the admissions committee? Yes, it's both, right? So your application is going to get routed to a faculty mentor who's going to be like, yes, I'm very excited about this student. But then, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of other faculty members saying, I want Jody, I want Avery. And so at the end of the day, it is a collective decision and can depend on things, frankly, that, some are within your control, some are not. Like if a faculty member is going on sabbatical, they might say, well, maybe it's not the year that I really deserve Jody. Because I'm about to go on sabbatical, she'd be coming in and would have to sort of navigate her first year while I'm off in Tahiti studying, grains of sand on the beach or whatever it is I'm studying. So, part of it is a little bit out of your control, but basically the admissions process is in strong input from a prospective advisor who's excited to have you, plus the committee sort of group decision. No, you don't have to live on campus. And then Jody, Avery, last question to you guys, and I think this will be a great way to wrap it up. Yeah, why a PhD?
Go first, Avery.
Got it. So I knew that my next step in my career, I wanted to be teaching and conducting original research at the university level, so being on a faculty. And so being on the PhD track was the natural next step in that progress.
I was really interested in, so my research on stress, really interested in understanding like what's happening to students' brains and bodies when they experience stress. And I realized that that type of knowledge I wouldn't be able to get in any other setting. So if I went to a think tank and did research there, I wouldn't be able to really learn that content. And so pursuing a PhD allowed me to do that. And that process really opened so many doors to me when I think about my next steps. So I was really guided by like the knowledge and the skills that I wanted.
All right, so thank you so much for, again, Dr. Galbeck, Dr. Miller, and Avery for being here. Here on the slide, we have some very important contact information. If you have any questions in regards to your application, feel free to email us or call us. And then if you have any program-related questions, please reach out to Ms. Raven Minervino, and her email address is on the slide. And I will share the next PhD webinar will be a student panel, and this webinar will be taking place on November 8th from 5 to 6 p.m. And the webinar invites will be going out soon, so please be sure to check your email if you're interested in hearing from our wonderful current SOE PhD students. So it looks like there are no more questions. We're out of time. So thank you again for your interest in the Johns Hopkins School of Education. We look forward to hearing from you. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thanks so much for taking the time, everyone. Bye-bye.